Okay. अपरे वसुदेवस्य देवक्यां याचितोऽभ्यगात् अजस्त्वमस्य क्षेमाय वधाय च सुरद्रुषाम्. Others say that since both Vasudeva and Devaki prayed for you, you have taken your birth as their son. Undoubtedly you are unborn, yet you take your birth for their welfare and to kill those who are envious of the demigods. So even though you're unborn, you have become the son of Vasudeva and Devaki. Sometimes Arbhatvam appears as a reading instead of Ajastvam, Arbhatvam, which is which suits very well. It directly means that you have, others say that you have become the son of Vasudeva and Devaki when you are begged for that. Tabhyameva purvam sutapah Vishnurupabhyam yachitasam. They themselves in their previous lives, in the forms of Sutapa and Prishni, had begged him to become their son. Asli Jagata Kshemaya. And he had appeared for the welfare of the universe. It is also said that Vasudeva and Devaki, their previous birth, the Sutapa and Prishni, underwent difficult type of penance to get the Lord as their son. And as a result of such austerities, the Lord appeared as their son. It is already declared in the Bhagavad Gita that the Lord appears for the welfare of all people of the world and to vanquish the asuras or the materialistic atheists. Why Krishna appeared. Bharavaranaye bhuvo navai modatau sitadya bhuri bharena jato hyatmam bhuvarthittaha. Others say that the world, being overburdened like a boat at sea, is much aggrieved, and that Brahma, who is your son, prayed for you, and so you have appeared to diminish the trouble. Padmabhaveti Brahma Prarthanasya Pradhanya Vikshaya. Others have the opinion that the self-born or Brahma had prayed to the Supreme Lord to come. Of course, the purpose for appearing, as set out in this verse and in the previous verse, is the same. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkratam. But nevertheless, here the cause is the prayer of Vasudeva and Devaki. And here the cause is the prayer of Lord Brahma. So therefore, this being the central feature of this explanation, this is considered. Prabhupada explains why Lord Brahma is referred to as Atmabhu, self-born. Self-born in the sense that he was directly born from the Supreme Lord without a mother. Brahma was the first living being born just after the creation, is the direct son of Narayana. Narayana, as Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, first of all entered the material universe. Without spiritual contact, matter cannot create. This principle was followed from the very beginning of the creation. Supreme Spirit entered the universe, and the first living being, Brahma, was born on a lotus flower, grown out of the transcendental abdomen of Vishnu. Vishnu is therefore known as Padmanabha. Brahma is known as Atmabhu because he was begotten directly from the father without any contact of mother Lakshmi Ji. Lakshmi Ji was present near Narayana, engaged in the service of the Lord, and still without contact with Lakshmi Ji, Narayana begot Brahma. That is the omnipotency of the Lord. One who foolishly considers Narayana like other living beings, should take a lesson from this. Narayana is not an ordinary living being. He is the personality of Godhead himself. And he has all the potencies of all the senses in all parts of his transcendental body. An ordinary living being begets a child by sexual intercourse, and he has no other means to beget a child other than the one designed for him. But Narayana, being omnipotent, is not bound to any condition of energy. He is complete and independent to do anything and everything by his various potencies very easily and perfectly. Brahma is therefore directly the son of the father and was not put into the womb of a mother. Therefore, he is known as Atma Bhu. So, Lord Brahma is given the responsibility of producing the universe, and he is the guru of the universe. Within the halo of the universe, there is a transcendental planet known as Shvetadvip, which is the abode of the Kshiravadshai Vishnu, the Paramatma feature of the Supreme Lord. Whenever there is trouble in the universe that cannot be solved by the administrative demigods, they approach Brahmaji for a solution. And if it is not to be solved even by Brahmaji, then Brahmaji consults and prays to the Kshirodakshai Vishnu for an incarnation and solution to the problems. So this kind of problem had appeared just before Krishna's birth, and as we will see in the 10th canto, Lord Brahma, followed by various demigods, they prayed for Krishna to descend. So some people think that because Lord Brahma prayed, therefore Krishna appeared. So this is another concept. Matantaram, another opinion. Bhavesmin Krishyamanaam avidya kama karmabhi shravana smaranarhani karishyan niti kechanam. And yet others say that he appeared for the sake of rejuvenating the devotional service of hearing, remembering, worshipping, and so on, in order that the conditioned souls suffering from material pangs might take advantage and gain liberation. So another opinion, the other opinion is this, that he may perform activities by hearing and remembering about them, by worshipping them. Those who are suffering in material existence can become free from avidya, which means ignorance, kama, material desires, and karma, activities which bind us to material world, to the material world. So this is another idea. Avidya refers to ignorance of one's supremely blissful constitutional nature. It is because of that one develops the sense of identification with the gross body and so on. And it is from that one develops intense desires, intense hankerings, material hankerings. From that, we engage in activities that bind us to material existence, because of which we suffer. So, the Supreme Lord desired to engage in activities which are fit to be remembered and so on. And by engaging in those activities, then one will become free from all of this. So, in order to get the conditioned souls who are suffering in this manner to become free from this suffering, the Supreme Lord, he appeared. This is another idea. So, Prabhupada, he points out that a living being cannot help but render service because he is constitutionally made for that purpose. The only function of the living being is to render service to the Lord. The Lord is great, and living beings are subordinate to him. Therefore, the duty of the living being is just to serve him only. Unfortunately, the illusioned living beings, out of misunderstanding only, become servants of the senses by material desire. This desire is called avidya, or nescience. And out of such desire, the living being makes different plans for material enjoyment centered about the perverted sex life. He therefore becomes entangled in the chain of birth and death by transmigrating into different bodies on different planets under the direction of the Supreme Lord. So avidya, kama, karma. Unless therefore one is beyond the boundary of this essence, one cannot get free from the threefold miseries of material life, which is indicated by suffering. This suffering refers to suffering, the three types of suffering: Adi Atmika, Adi Daivika, Adi Bhautika. So the Supreme Lord, what does he do? This is what he does. The Lord, however, out of his causeless mercy, because he is more merciful to suffering living beings than they can expect, appears before them and renovates the principles of devotion service, comprising of hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, worshipping, praying, cooperating, and surrendering unto him. Not cooperating refers to dasyam. Serving refers to vandanam. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam. Yes. The vandanam is praying. So, why does Krishna appear? Krishna appears because he engages in activities which inspire us to engage in Navavita Bhakti. But the Supreme Lord Krishna, he also rarely directly comes and demonstrates Navavita Bhakti. This particular type of mercy is bestowed upon the living being by the Lord in the form of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. अस्ति पक्षस्य सिद्धान्तताम् अभिप्रेत्य श्रवणादि फलमाह शृण्वन्ति. So now different opinions have been stated so far. So which one is accepted as the actual conclusion by Kunti Devi? It is this last opinion. And that is clear from the next text which she speaks. Here she is speaking the result of engaging in Shravanam, Kirtanam and so on. So from this it is understood. This is the conclusion. This is the actual reason why Krishna comes. Others are incidental reasons. Shrinvanti gayanti gridanti abhikshnashaha smaranti nandanti tavehitam janaha ta eva pashyanti asharena tavakam bhava pravahopa ramam padambujam. O Krishna, those who continuously hear, chant and repeat your transcendental activities or take pleasure in others doing so, certainly see your lotus feet, which alone can stop the repetition of birth and death. So they hear and they sing, they recite repeatedly, they remember. But even if they simply congratulate others doing it, they take pleasure in others glorifying Krishna, those people, they are also included here. So they certainly see the Supreme Lord's lotus feet. No doubt that they will see. And they will see soon. There is emphasis here for every different word in this verse. And what kind of benefit will they attain? They will attain cessation of birth and death. That comes as a pravaha, as a stream continuously for conditioned souls. But one can get free. So this is a special feature of Krishna's pastimes. He inspires devotees to engage in devotional service unto him, specifically of the spontaneous type. When Sri Krishna was personally present on the face of the globe, not everyone could see him as a supreme personality of Godhead. Therefore, even though the Lord may be present before our eyes, it is not possible to see him unless we have the necessary vision. This necessary qualification is developed by the process of devotion service only, beginning with hearing about the Lord from the right sources. So, the idea is Krishna appears in order to cause the conditioned souls to engage in pure devotional service unto his lotus feet, by which we can see his lotus feet, which means by which we can see him. So you can see him only after you do certain things. You cannot just see him the way historians uh, imagine that Krishna is just a historical person. It's not like that. And then Prabhupada explains the Bhagavad Gita is one of the popular literatures which is generally heard, chanted, repeated, etc. by the people in general. But in spite of such hearing, etc., sometimes it is experienced that the performer of such devotional service does not see the Lord face to face. The reason is that the first attempt, Shravana, is very important. If hearing is from the right sources, it acts quickly. Generally, people hear from unauthorized persons. Such unauthorized persons may be very learned by academic qualifications. But because they do not follow the principles of devotional service, hearing from them becomes a sheer waste of time. Sometimes the texts are interpreted fashionably to suit their own purposes. Therefore, first one should select a competent and bona fide speaker and then hear from him. When the hearing process is perfect and complete, the other processes become automatically perfect in their own way. So the Supreme Lord, he comes in order to engage in these various activities so that we can hear about him. Specifically, this is so for Krishna Leela. There are many other pastimes. Okay, here in the Bhagavatam, the activities of the Lord begin from his dealings with the Pandavas. There are many other pastimes of the Lord in connection with his dealings with the Asuras and others. And in the 10th canto, the sublime dealings with his conjugal associates, the gopis, as well as with his married wives at Dwaraka are mentioned. Since the Lord is absolute, there is no difference in the transcendental nature of each and every dealing of the Lord. But sometimes people, when unauthorized hearing process, take more interest in hearing about the dealings with the gopis. Such an inclination indicates the lusty feelings of the hearer. So, the dealings of the Lord, never Bhagavatam or any other scriptures, and that will help the hearer attain perfection by progress to all mundane attachment. In the of the Lord, he is the hearer of circumstances. Hear about him or about his devotees or competitors. It conducive to spiritual life. Tava asmat parityaga anuchita. Then in 4 verses beginning with text 37, she points out that it is inappropriate for Krishna to abandon all of them. Apyadyanastvam swakrute hita prabho jihasasi suhridono jivinaha yesham nachanyad bhavatah padambuja parayanam rajasuyojitam hasam. Oh my Lord, you have executed all duties yourself. Are you leaving us today, though we are completely dependent on your mercy and have no one else to protect us, now when all kings are at enmity with us? So she points out, oh Master, we are very dear to you. Are you going to leave us? We have no other shelter. We have given distress to others. So therefore, we may have to face some distress that is implied. Now here, what is special about the Pandavas? And why are the Pandavas brought up in discussions about Krishna in the first canto? It's because they were entirely dependent on Krishna. It's a very interesting thing. The Pandavas were entirely dependent on Krishna. First of all, in the material world, to be entirely dependent on anyone else is considered to be something which is very unfortunate. But it is not the case when you have to depend entirely on the Supreme Lord. In fact, the very opposite is true. Because we are trying to become independent of the Supreme Lord, therefore we are very in trouble. Prabhupada points out, like, from and avoid having set aside one's mind fully in dependence on the Supreme Lord. So Prabhupada is very nicely pointing out the highest achievement of perfect civilization is to work with valor, but at the same time depend completely on the Lord. The Pandavas were the ideal executors of this standard of civilization. Undoubtedly, they were completely dependent on the goodwill of Lord Sri Krishna, but they were not idle parasites of the Lord. They were all highly qualified, both by personal character and by physical activities. Still, they always looked for the mercy of the Lord because they knew that every living being is dependent by constitutional position. The perfection of life is therefore to become dependent on the will of the Lord instead of becoming falsely independent in the material world. Those who try to become falsely independent of the Lord are called anatha, or without any guardian. Anatha means an orphan, whereas those who are completely dependent on the will of the Lord are called sanatha, or those having someone to protect them. Therefore, we must try to be sanatha so that we can always be protected from the unfavorable condition of material existence. Sanatha Jivitam. When will I attain a life where I am fully taken care of? It's a statement by Yamunacharya, Stotra Ratna, quoted by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So that is the normal condition for us. When we become aware that Lord Vasudeva is the only fit object for surrender. All the members of the Pandava family were Mahatmas in household life. Maharaj Yudhishthira was head of these Mahatmas. And Queen Kunti Devi was the mother. The lessons of the Bhagavad Gita in all the Puranas, specifically the Bhagavata Purana, and therefore inevitably connected with the history of the Pandava Mahatmas. For them, separation from the Lord was just like the separation of a fish from water. Srimati Kunti Devi therefore felt such separation like a thunderbolt, and the whole prayer of the queen is try to dissuade the Lord to stay with them. After the battle of Kurukshetra, although the inimical kings were killed, their sons and grandsons were still there to deal with the Pandavas. So when she is trying to persuade Krishna to stay with them, it is not to enjoy Krishna's association in order to exploit the facilities that come with Krishna's association. It is to render spotless devotion service unto his lotus feet. That will become clear towards the end of her prayers. Sridhar Swami. Now, in order to take care of you, she anticipates that Krishna might be thinking, in order to take care of you, you have your relatives, the Yadavas. You have your sons, the Pandavas. They're heroic. They're capable. So why do you talk in such a helpless manner? Then she speaks. Text 38. Kevayam namarupabhyam yadubhi saha pandavah bhavato darshanam yaki krishnam iveshituhu. The name of a particular body is finished. Similarly, if you don't look up all our fame and activities along with the Pandavas and Yadus will end at once. When you don't glance down, then along which refers to our prosperous state, the others also, we will simply become most insignificant. Just like the master of the senses, the jiva, the living entity, and the senses. When the living entity is not there, then the senses do not function. So it's like that. So she understands her position very clearly. Kunti Devi is quite aware that the existence of the Pandavas is due to Sri Krishna only. The Pandavas are undoubtedly well established in name and fame and are guided by the great King Yudhishthira, who is morality personified. And the Yadus are undoubtedly great allies. But without the guidance of Lord Krishna, all of them are non-entities as much as the senses of the body are useless without the guidance of consciousness. No one should be proud of his prestige, power, and fame without being guided by the favor of the Supreme Lord. This even applies when we take to Krishna consciousness. When we take to Krishna consciousness, we are actually coming closer and closer to Krishna's lotus feet. There are three stages of devotion service that we learn in the nectar of devotion: sadhana bhakti, bhava bhakti, and prema bhakti. And in sadhana bhakti, when we engage in pure sadhana bhakti, we attain uh, two, we experience two features of pure devotional service. We become free from all kinds of miseries, karmic reactions, as well as nescience, avidya, ignorance, spiritual ignorance. That is one feature. And then another is we develop very auspicious qualities. Now, this is just because when we engage in pure devotion service, we have turned our face back towards Krishna's lotus feet and we are approaching him. And it is only by Krishna's grace that we have this. So when we start thinking that the happiness that we experience in devotional service is due to us, if we ourselves are the cause of this, then again we are making the same mistake that non-devotees make. The benefits of pure devotion service unto Krishna's lotus feet, even the benefits due to impure devotional service, that is also due to Krishna. And we should recognize that is the lesson that Kunti Devi is teaching us here. Moreover, Neyam Shobhishyate Tatra Yathedanim Gadadhara Tvatpadai Rankita Bhati Swalakshna Vilakshitai. O Gadadhara. Gadadhara is the name of Krishna, one who holds the mace. Our kingdom is now being marked by the impressions of your feet, and therefore it appears beautiful. But when you leave, it will no longer be so. The land that we are meant to protect is marked by the unique markings on your lotus feet, such as the thunderbolt and so on. There are certain features, certain markings on Krishna's lotus feet. Now, when you go away, we will not see these marks. There are certain particular marks on the feet of the Lord, which distinguish the Lord from others. The marks of a flag, thunderbolt, an instrument to drive an elephant, umbrella, lotus, disc, etc., are on the bottom of the Lord's feet. These marks are impressed upon the soft dust of the land where the Lord traverses. The land of Hastinapur was thus marked while Lord Sri Krishna was there with the Pandavas, and the kingdom of the Pandavas thus flourished by such auspicious signs. Kunti Devi pointed out these distinguished features and was afraid of ill luck in the absence of the Lord. Ime janapadas vruddha supakvau shutivi rudha vanadrin nadjudanvanto hyedante tava vikshitaihi. All these cities and villages are flourishing in all respects because the herbs and grains are in abundance. The trees are full of fruits, the rivers are flowing, the hills are full of minerals, and the oceans full of wealth. All this, and this is all due to your glancing upon them. So this land, which is filled with extremely great prosperity, it is all because you have glanced upon them. Now, Prabhupada, he now points out that this is what is called advancement of civilization. Advancement of civilization means prosperity in natural resources, not prosperity through man-made technology and so on. Human prosperity flourishes by natural gifts, not by gigantic industrial enterprises. The gigantic industrial enterprises are products of a godless civilization, and they cause the destruction of the noble aims of human life. The more we go on increasing such troublesome industries to squeeze out the vital energy of the human being, the more there will be unrest and dissatisfaction of the people in general. Although a few only can live lavishly by exploitation. The natural gifts such as grains and vegetables, fruits, rivers, the hills of jewels and minerals, and the seas full of pearls are supplied by the order of the Supreme. And as he desires, material nature produces them in abundance or restricts them at times. The natural law is that the human being may take advantage of these godly gifts by nature and satisfactorily flourish on them without being captivated by the exploitative motive of lording it over material nature. The more we attempt to exploit material nature according to our whims of enjoyment, the more we shall become entrapped by the reaction of such exploitative attempts. If we have sufficient grains, fruits, vegetables, and herbs, then what is the necessity of running a slaughterhouse and killing poor animals? A man need not kill an animal if he has sufficient grains and vegetables to eat. The flow of river waters fertilizes the fields, and that is more than what we need. Minerals are produced in the hills and the jewels in the ocean. If the human civilization has sufficient grains, minerals, jewels, water, milk, etc., then why should it hanker after terrible industrial enterprises at the cost of the labor of some unfortunate men? But all these natural gifts are dependent on the mercy of the Lord. What we need, therefore, is to be obedient to the laws of the Lord and achieve the perfection of human life by devotional service. Now we are in pandemic time. The whole world is now talking about food security, having local resources, local necessities, and about the dangers of being fully dependent on the grid, on the external world. Not that just for my own food, I need to depend on something that is going to come from some other country. This is natural life, and it promotes a natural sense of depending on nature, which is just Krishna's energy. Gamane Pandavanaam Kushal. Agamane cha Yadavanaam ityubhayato vyakulchitta sati teshu snehan nivrittim prarthayate atheti. If Krishna goes, she thinks it will not be good for the Pandavas. If Krishna does not go, she thinks it will not be good for the Yadavas. So, thinking about both of this, her mind became disturbed. Therefore, she prays that she be freed from this kind of affection for her family members. Atha Vishvesha Vishwatman Vishwamurte Swakeshu Me Snehapasham Imam Chindi Dridham Pandushu Vrishnishu. O Lord of the universe, soul of the universe, O personality of the form of the universe, please therefore sever my tie of affection for my kinsmen, the Pandavas and the Vrishnis. A pure devotee of the Lord is ashamed to ask anything in self-interest from the Lord. But the householders are sometimes obliged to ask favors for the Lord, being bound by the tie of family affection. Srimati Kunti Devi was conscious of this fact, and therefore she prayed to the Lord to cut off the affectionate tie from her own kinsmen, the Pandavas and the Vrishnis. The Pandavas are her own sons, and the Vrishnis are members of her paternal family. Krishna was equally related to both the families. Both the families required the Lord's help because both were dependent devotees of the Lord. Now, why does she talk about cutting off this affectionate tie? A pure devotee cuts off the limited ties of affection for this family and widens his activities of devotional service for all forgotten souls, like the six Goswamis. They gave up their bondage with their respective families, but that was in order to distribute Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy to the whole world. To cut off all family affection means to broaden the field of activities. Without doing this, no one can be qualified as a Brahmana, a king, a public leader, or a devotee of the Lord. The personality of Godhead as an ideal king showed this. For example, Sri Ramachandra cut off the tie of affection for his beloved wife to manifest the qualities of an ideal king. Such personalities as a Brahmana, a devotee, a king, or a public leader must be very broad minded in discharging their respective duties. Srimati Kunti Devi was conscious of this fact, and being weak, she prayed to be free from such bondage of family affection. And therefore, she is praying to the Lord in his universal form. So the idea is, you're more powerful than me. So you can take this away from me. Prabhupada's father used to say, God has 10 hands. You have 2 hands. If God wants to take things away from you with 2 hands, you cannot stop him. Who's taking things away from you with 10 hands, you cannot stop him. Similarly, if God wants to give you, then with 2 hands, you cannot prevent him from giving you with his 10 hands. So therefore, here also, Kunti Devi is praying to the Supreme Lord in his universal form. Tatah kim ataha tvayiti. All right. But why do you want this affection to be destroyed? There's a purpose behind it. She reveals that purpose in the next text, text 42. Tvayi me nanya vishaya matir madhupate sakrit ratim mudvahata daddha gange vaugham mudanvati. O Lord of Madhu, as the Ganges forever flows to the sea without hindrance, let my attraction be constantly drawn unto you without being diverted to anyone else. So this is what she wants. She wants to engage in devotion service unto Krishna's lotus feet exclusively. To cut off the tie of all other affections does not mean complete negation of the finer elements like affection for someone else. This is not possible. A living being, whoever he may be, must have this feeling of affection for others because this is a symptom of life. Desire cannot be negated, but in devotion service, the desire is changed only for the service of the Lord in place of desire for sense gratification. In other words, one can desire that his family members come to the point of exclusive pure devotional service unto Krishna's lotus feet. So in that way, one's affection for one's family, one's desire to benefit others is known as affection. So that affection is still there, but it is now purified in an enlightened form. It is enlightened affection. Prabhupada then gives the example of Arjuna himself. When he heard the message of the Lord, Srimad Bhagavad Gita, he changed his desire and served the Lord. And for his doing so, he became a famous devotee of the Lord, for it is declared in all the scriptures that Arjuna attained spiritual perfection by devotion service to the Lord in friendship. The fighting was there, the friendship was there. Arjuna was there, and Krishna was there. But Arjuna became a different person by devotional service. Therefore, the prayers of Kunti also indicate the same categorical changes in activities. Srimati Kunti wanted to serve the Lord without diversion, and that was her prayer. This unalloyed devotion is the ultimate goal of life. Our attention is usually diverted to the service of something which is non-godly or not in the program of the Lord. So Kunti Devi, she wanted that she serve the Supreme Lord absolutely. Her affection for the Pandavas and the Vrishnis is not out of the range of devotion service because the service of the Lord and the service of the devotees are identical. Sometimes service to the devotee is more valuable than service to the Lord. But here, the affection of Kunti Devi for the Pandavas and the Vrishnis was due to family affection, family relation. This tie of affection in terms of material relation is a relation of Maya, because the relations of the body or the mind are due to the influence of the external energy. For instance, we may have children who are devotees, and we may imagine that our affection for these children is spiritual because I am practicing Krishna consciousness and my children are also engaged in Krishna consciousness. But if there was absolutely not even a tinge of Maya's influence on him, Then when something bad happens to our children, we feel sad. But we don't feel sad in the same manner when other children who are also engaged in Krishna consciousness suffer in the same manner. So from that we understand that even though there is some Krishna consciousness involved in our affection for our children, it is rooted in a Mayic relationship right now. So this is what Kunti Devi was referring to. When Kunti Devi wanted to cut off the family relation, she meant to cut off the relation of the skin. The skin relation is the cause of material bondage, but the relation of the soul is the cause of freedom. Evam abhyartya punah pranamati. Having prayed in this manner, again she offers obeisances. Shri Krishna Krishna Saka Vrishabha Vanidhukrajanya Vamsha Dahana Napavargavirya Govind Godbit Surarti Haravatar Yogeshwara Kilaguro Bhagavan Namaste. O Krishna, friend of Arjuna, O chief amongst the descendants of Vrishni, you are the destroyer of those political parties which are disturbing elements on this earth. Your prowess never deteriorates. You are the proprietor of the transcendental abode, and you descend to relieve the distresses of the cows, the brahmanas, and the devotees. You possess all mystic powers, and you are the preceptor of the entire universe. You are the Almighty God, and I offer you my respectful obeisances. Te Namaha. I offer my obeisances unto your lotus feet, Hey Sri Krishna, O Lord Sri Krishna. Upakaran anusmaranti Muda Sambodhayati. She refers to him, she calls out to him in many ways while remembering the various forms of help that he has bestowed upon her and upon those dear to him. Krishna Sakha, Arjunasya Sakhe. Krishna Sakha uh, refers to Arjuna. Therefore, she refers to him, oh friend of Arjuna. But here also you notice that she is referring to Arjuna. So that means she still has affection for Arjuna. Otherwise, why would she refer to Arjuna? But now she's thinking of Arjuna as a friend of Krishna, not as her son. She refers to him as Govinda, which indicates that he's filled with opulences. Which sort of opulence? The opulences of the Kamadhenu and so on. The Almighty Lord, as his eternal transcendental abode, where he is engaged in keeping Surabhi cows, he is served by hundreds and thousands of goddesses of fortune. He descends to the material world to reclaim his devotees and to annihilate the disturbing elements in groups of political parties and kings who are supposed to be in charge of administration work. He creates, maintains, and annihilates by his unlimited energies, and still is always full with prowess and does not deteriorate in potency. The cows, the brahmanas, and the devotees of the Lord are all objects of his special attention because they are very important factors for the general welfare of living beings. We should always remember this. As much as we are thinking about him, he is thinking about us. In fact, he thinks about us more than we think about him. So when we take to Krishna consciousness, Krishna is paying special attention to our needs. We should not ever think that I need to take care of myself. It is the Supreme Lord, that is the Supreme Lord's worry and duty. And He is doing it. To whatever extent we need to be taken care of, we will be taken care of. Then, Kala, okay. Suto Vacha. Prathetham Kalapadai. Parinutakilodaya. Mandam Jahasa Vaikuntho Mohayanniva Mayaya. Suta Goswami said, the Lord, thus hearing the prayers of Kunti Devi, composed in choice words for his glorification, mildly smiled. That smile was as enchanting as his mystic power. It should be noted that We are in this material world, we are enchanted in different ways. When we turn away from Krishna, we are enchanted by various objects within material existence. And when we take to Krishna consciousness, we're enchanted by Krishna's glories. His energy is displayed in different ways as electrical energy works in manifold capacities. Srimati Kunti Devi has prayed to the Lord just to enunciate a fragment of his glories. All his devotees worship him in that way by chosen words, and therefore the Lord is known as Uttama Shloka. The word Maya is used both in the sense of delusion and mercy. In other words, that smile was as enchanting as his mystic power. But it also means that he was merciful upon her. He smiled at her out of mercy. Tam Badham Ityupamantri Pravishyan Gajasahvayam Striyascha Swapuram Yasyan Premna Ranya Nivaritaha. Thus accepting the prayers of Srimati Kunti Devi, the Lord subsequently informed other ladies of his departure by entering the palace of Hastinapur. But upon preparing to leave, he was stopped by King Yudhishthira, who implored him lovingly. So the Supreme Lord, he accepted. What did he accept? He accepted Kunti Devi's prayer. What prayer did he accept exactly? Vai me nanya vishayamatir iti yat prarthitam tad badham iti angikritya. Supreme Lord, he accepted Kunti Devi's prayer. May my mind be exclusively fixed on you. May I only engage in devotion service unto you. This prayer, this was the concluding prayer also. The last three verses is still my cry of affection. For our close to see Enanya Vishaya Madhupati subject. Let me attract and constantly drawn unto you without being diverted to anyone else. This was that the accepted. This is what he accepted. No one could make Lord Krishna stay at Hastinapur when he decided to start for Dwarka. But the simple request of King Yudhishthira that the Lord remain there for a few days more was immediately effective. One should not misunderstand that Kunti had also wanted him to stay, and Krishna refused that. And Yudhishthira simply out of love, he called him, and therefore Krishna was satisfied with him. Krishna was dissatisfied by all these elaborate philosophical prayers. That is a misconception. That is not what is being brought out here. Prayer came to a particular conclusion. Please engage me exclusively in your devotion service. So that he dealt the two different pure devotees in two different ways. That's all. अथ भीष्म निर्याणोत्सवं वक्तुम् उपोद्घात कथां प्रस्तौति. Upadghata. Katham Prastauti. And then Sutta Goswami, he introduces a particular incident. He wants to talk about the disappearance festival of Bhishma Dev. And therefore, he introduces it by describing certain events. Vyasadhyai, Ishvarehadhyai, Krishnena Bhutakarmana, Prabhotito itihase nabudhyata shucharpita. King Yudhishthir, who was much aggrieved, could not be convinced despite instructions by great sages headed by Vyasa and the Lord Krishna himself, the performer of superhuman feats, and despite all historical evidence. Vyasadhyai prabodhitopi shushavyaptas san na abudhyata vivekam na prapa. Even though Yudhishthir was counseled by Vyasa and others, he was overcome by lamentation. So he did not understand, which means he did not attain discriminating knowledge. Kutaha, why? Ishvara ihaya adhyaihi. Because they did not know, the persons who were counseling him, they did not know that Krishna had a plan. What was Krishna's plan? His plan was he should be taken to Kurukshetra, where Bhishma was there. Bhishma wanted to depart in the presence of Krishna. Bhishma was a direct devotee of the Supreme Lord. He wanted Bhishma to counsel him and enlighten him, meaning Yudhishthira. So, because they did not understand that, that is also by the Lord's will that they did not understand that. Naturally, they would know. But it is by the will of the Lord they did not understand that. Atra hetu, why they didn't understand? And that too, Yudhishthira did not understand. He was in a state of confusion. We'll see that in a few verses now. Even when Lord Krishna tried to dispel that confusion, Yudhishthira was still in a state of confusion. Why is this? Adbhuta karmana. Because Krishna is a person who performs all kinds of superhuman work. So, in such a manner that even when he is trying to make Yudhishthira understand something, Yudhishthira still doesn't understand. Sridhar Swami gives an example here. Just as there was a time when the Pandavas and Kauravas, Krishna wanted to establish a truce before the Kurukshetra war. So at that time, Krishna went. Krishna spoke. He gave various reasonable arguments to the Kauravas. But after he did all that, the Kauravas were even more firm that there should be a war, or they should be forever separate. So similarly here also, despite the various instructions that he gave to Yudhishthira, Yudhishthira was still confused because it was the superhuman will of the Lord that he wanted it like this. The context is brought out by Prabhupada in his purport. Now, one thing that is very Herculean contribution, I will say, from Prabhupada to people of the modern world, is that people in today's world are largely and greatly ignorant of the very basics of Vedic knowledge and Vedic histories. Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Bhagavad, these three books, basically they are the foundation of Vedic culture. In today's world, people don't know basic things. They don't know the history of, at least in essence, they should be knowing the basic storyline of Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavatam. But since that is more or less gone, Prabhupada presents this historical context in his purport often, which is very, very good. The pious king Yudhishthira was mortified because of the mass massacre of human beings in the battle of Kurukshetra, especially on his account. Duryodhana was there on the throne, and he was doing well in his administration. And in one sense, there was no need of fighting. But on the principle of justice, Yudhishthira was to replace him. The whole clique of politics centered around this point, and all the kings and residents of the whole world became involved in this fight between the rival brothers. Lord Krishna was also there on the side of King Yudhishthira. So we can see so many people died. Practically, this was the greatest battle in the world within 5,000 years. This mass killing, simply to enthrone Maharaj Yudhishthira, was too mortifying So he tried to be convinced with evidences from histories by great sages like Vyasa and the Lord himself that the fight was just because the cause was just. But Maharaj Yudhishthira would not be satisfied, even though he was instructed by the greatest personalities of the time. So here you note, Vyasa could not convince him, other sages could not convince him, Krishna could not convince him. Why is that? Because Krishna did not want Yudhishthira to be convinced. He did not allow Vyasa and other sages to speak in a manner that would absolutely convince Yudhishthira. He wanted that Yudhishthira be convinced by Bhishma. He did not allow the king to be convinced by the words of Vyasa and others, including himself, because he desired that the king hear instructions from the dying Bhishma Dev, who was another great devotee of the Lord. The Lord wanted that at the last stage of his material existence, the great warrior Bhishma Dev see him personally and see his beloved grandchildren, King Yudhishthira, etc., now situated on the throne, and thus pass away very peacefully. Bhishma was not satisfied to fight against the Pandavas, who were his beloved fatherless grandchildren. But the Kshatriyas are also very stern people, and therefore he was obliged to take the side of Duryodhana because he was maintained at the expense of Duryodhana. Besides this, the Lord also desired that King Yudhishthira be pacified by the words of Bhishmadev, so that the world could see that Bhishmadev excelled all in knowledge, including the Lord himself. Abodham eva prapancheti aheti shadbhi. So in 6 verses, beginning with text 47, Suta Goswami elaborates on Yudhishthira's lack of understanding. Aharaja dharmasutas chintayan suhridam vadham prakritenatmana vipra sneha moha vasham gataha. King Yudhishthira, son of Dharma, overwhelmed by the death of his friends, was aggrieved just like a common materialistic man. O sages, thus deluded by affection, he began to speak. So just as Arjuna was put into delusion by Krishna's will, here also Yudhishthira is put into illusion by Krishna's will. The common man thinks of violence and non-violence in terms of the body, but that is a kind of delusion. Everyone is duty bound according to one's occupational duties. A Kshatriya is bound to fight for the right cause, regardless of the opposite party. In such discharge of duty, one should not be disturbed by annihilation of the material body. Aho me pashita jnanam hridirudham duratmana parakkasya dehasya bahyo me kshauhi nirhatah. King Yudhishthira said, "O my Lord, I am the most sinful man. Just see my heart, which is full of ignorance. This body, which is ultimately meant for others, has killed many, many phalanxes of men. Parakyasya Shvashrigala Dhyaharasya Dehasya Arthe. This body is ultimately meant for others. It will be eaten by dogs or jackals and so on after it dies. The body is, after all, meant for others. When there is life in the body, it's meant for the service of others, and when it is dead, it is meant to be eaten by dogs and jackals or maggots. He is sorry because for such a temporary body, such a huge massacre was committed. He was the most pious person, therefore he thinks like this. And Akshohini is a unit. I mean, you can see this. It's a standard Vedic unit. This is Prabhupada's simple enumeration of Akshohini. It is based on the definition of an Akshohini from the Mahabharata, which is quoted by Srila Sridhar Swami. It's exactly this. Baladvijya Suhrin Mitra Pitra Bhratrik Guru Druha Namesyan Nirayan Moksho Hyapi Varsha Yuta Yutai. I have killed many boys, brahmanas, well-wishers, friends, parents, preceptors, and brothers. Though I live millions of years, I will not be relieved from the hell that awaits me for all these sins. Whenever there's a war, these innocent people, these civilians, somehow or other they will be killed, even if you don't intend to do so. Whenever there is a war, there is certainly a massacre of many innocent living beings, such as boys, brahmanas, and women, whose killing is considered to be the greatest of sins. They're all innocent creatures, and in all circumstances, killing of them is forbidden in the scriptures. Maharaj Yudhishthira was aware of these mass killings. Similarly, there were friends, parents, and preceptors also on both sides, and all of them were killed. It was simply horrible for him to think of such killing, and therefore he was thinking of residing in hell for millions and billions of years. नैनोराज्ञ प्रजाभर्तो धर्मयुद्धे वधोद्विषा इति में न तो बोधाय कल्पते शासनम वचः. There is no sin for a king who kills for the right cause, who is engaged in maintaining his citizens. But this injunction is not applicable for me. स्मृत्याद्यनुशासनात् धर्मयुद्धे न दोष इति चेत् तत्राह नैनोराज्ञ इति. Yudhishthira thought that somebody might argue, no, in a dharma yuddha, in a war that is fought on the basis of Vedic dharma, there is nothing wrong because the Dharma Shastras have permitted that. The basic idea is this. Swaprajanam anyato vadhe prasakte tadvadho anagyataha. If a king tries to kill one's own citizens, let us say there's King A, King B. King A is in his own kingdom and he has the citizens who live under him. He's taking care of them. But King B tries to kill the citizens of King A. When such a situation occurs, then King A is authorized to kill King B. Duryodhanena tu prajayam palyam manayam maya kevalam rajalobhena tatvat papame vedamiti. But Yudhishthira thinks, this is how he thinks, Duryodhana was taking care of his citizens, but I was greedy to take over Duryodhana's throne. And therefore, in this war, so many people have died, which means I have killed all of them. Maharaj Yudhishthira thought that although he was not actually involved in the administration of the kingdom, which was being carried on well by Duryodhana without harm to the citizens, he caused the killing of so many living beings only for his personal gain of the kingdom from the hands of Duryodhana. The killing was committed not in the course of administration, but for the sake of self-aggrandizement. And as such, he thought himself responsible for all the sins. Strinam madhyata bandhunam droho yosa vihodhitaha karma bher vihamedhi ye naham kalpo vyapohitum. I have killed many friends of women and I have thus caused enmity to such an extent that it is not possible to undo it by material welfare. Friends of women means relatives, dharmic relatives of women, their father, their brother, elder brother or younger brother, husband, son, uncle, nephew, in this way. So the idea is that this material welfare work, these things, these pious activities are meant to be performed for the sake of material prosperity, which is of course sometimes disturbed by various sinful activities. And therefore, there are procedures of atonement. To get relief from such sinful reactions, the Vedas prescribe several kinds of sacrifices. It is said in the Vedas that by performing the Ashwamedha Yajna, horse sacrifice, one can get relief from even Brahmahatya, killing of a Brahmana. Yudhishthira Maharaj performed this Ashwamedha Yajna, but he thinks that even by performing such yajnas, it is not possible to get relief from the great sins committed. In war, either the husband or brother or even the father or sons go to fight. And when they are killed, a fresh enmity is created. And thus, a chain of actions and reactions increases, which is not possible to be counteracted, even by thousands of Ashwamedha yajnas. What he has forgotten is this war was conducted by Krishna's will. And Krishna is the one who wanted Yudhishthira to be placed on the throne of Hastinapur. Krishna does not do anything whimsically. Krishna's instructions and activities are always in line with Vedic Dharma. Sometimes it may be difficult to understand how it is, but the Acharyas give evidence that every time he is following Vedic Dharma, he never breaks it. Even in his Swayam Bhagavan feature, he doesn't break it. Therefore, factually, no sin whatsoever touched the Pandavas, who were only the order carriers of the law. For others who declare war out of personal interest, the whole responsibility lies on them and they have to be punished. So when Krishna says that you must fight this war, then that is fully in line with Vedic Dharma, not just because he says it. We are not just some foolish fanatics that whatever Krishna says, we'll simply accept it. When Krishna comes as Buddha and he says something, we reject it. So our acharyas, they're very learned in Vedic Dharma. So they teach us under what circumstances what should be accepted and what should not be accepted. Krishna's own intentions are always in line with the Vedic scripture. Lord Buddha did not teach what was his own intention. Therefore, Buddha's teachings are rejected. But when Krishna, in Mahabharata, when Krishna says that Yudhishthira should be placed on the throne, that is because the Dharma Shastra itself says that in a situation like that, this is what should be done. This was recognized by other sages who all agreed that Krishna's statement that Yudhishthira should be placed on the throne was the right decision to make. Yatha pankena pankambha suraya va surakritu bhuta hatyam tathaiva kam na yagyair mashtumarhati. As it is not possible to filter muddy water through mud or purify a wine-stained pot with wine, it is not possible to counteract the killing of men by sacrificing animals. So now, Yudhishthira Maharaj, he rejects the concept that Ashwamedha and other sacrifices can purify one on the basis of some false logic. Actually, this is not correct because, as it will be explained, these sacrifices, when they are properly done, they actually purify one if they are properly done. Ashwamedha Yagyas or Gomedha Yagyas, sacrifices in which a horse or bull is sacrificed, were not, of course, for the purpose of killing the animals. Lord Chaitanya said that such animals sacrificed on the altar of Yagya were rejuvenated and a new life was given to them. It was just to prove the efficacy of the hymns of the Vedas. By recitation of the hymns of the Vedas in the proper way, certainly the performer gets relief from the reactions of sins. But in case of such sacrifices improperly done under inexpert management, surely one has to become responsible for animal sacrifice. So the Prabhupada has pointed out that Yudhishthira Maharaj's hesitance in engaging in Ashwamedha Yajna is a hint for those of us in the age of Kali. Maharaj Yudhishthira therefore gives a hint to performing sacrifices in the age of Kali. In the Kali Yuga, the only sacrifice recommended is the performance of Harinama Yajna, inaugurated by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But one should not indulge in animal killing and counteract it by performing the Harinama Yajna. Then let's go to chapter 9. Yudhishthiraya Bhishmena Sarva Dharma Nirupana Krishna Stutischa Muktischa. Navame Tasya Varanyate. The passing away of Bhishma Dev in the presence of Lord Krishna. The 9th chapter describes that Bhishma described all the different types of dharma to Yudhishthira, and that he prayed to Lord Krishna, and that he was liberated from material existence. सूतोवाच इति भीतः प्रजाद्रोहात् सर्वधर्म विवित्सया यतो विनशनं प्रागाद् यत्र देवं व्रतो पतत्. Suta Goswami said, being afraid for having killed so many subjects on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Maharaj Yudhishthira went to the scene of the massacre. There Bhishmadev was lying on a bed of arrows about to pass away. Now here, one point should be brought up because there is some misconception amongst the non-devotees that has entered into the Vaishnava community. Vedic Dharma is act-based Dharma, act-based morality. What do I mean by this? Let me explain. Right. There are different concepts on what is moral, what is immoral. Some people think that certain acts are inherently moral. Some others think that no, the intentions or the purposes are what make certain acts moral. The idea is this. Some people think that when certain activities are trademarked as moral activities, whereas some others think that no, it is the intention or purposes that make it moral. If you have a moral intention, then that activity is moral. If you have an immoral intention, that activity is immoral. So there is no activities by themselves are neither moral nor immoral in this conception. There's a third conception based on consequences. This is called consequentialistic morality. Some others think, no, if you perform a certain activity which leads to certain good consequences, moral consequences, then that activity in that particular circumstance is good or moral. Whereas when the same activity leads to a different consequence, then that activity is immoral or bad. So activities by themselves are neither good nor bad. Now, in Vedic scripture, which kind of morality is promoted? It is actually act-based morality. However, there are two types of act-based morality. There is scriptural act-based morality. There is non-scriptural act-based morality. When the scriptures prescribe particular activities to be done, it is those activities that are moral by themselves. Whatever purpose you may engage in them, you may engage in those activities for, it doesn't matter. Those activities by themselves, but they have to be scriptural activities, not non-scriptural activities. Like for instance, there are 5 circumstances under which when one tells a lie, he will not go to hell. Apart from those 5, if you tell a lie, then you will go to hell. So the scriptural activities are directly connected with consequences. But the consequence means we are not talking of consequence in this life, we are talking of consequence in the next life. So in this life, it may appear that you are undergoing a disadvantage in this life, but in your future lives, you'll be benefited. But it has to be scriptural activity, not non-scriptural activity. I don't have time to explain it here, but we'll certainly come across this later on, and I'll bring it up again, and I will explain this. Just for time being, just remember, dharmam tu sakshat bhagavad pranitam, veda pranihito dharma. Dharma is that which is promoted by the Supreme Lord, and dharma is that which is prescribed in the Vedic scripture. So it is scriptural act. When we come up with our own principles of morality, like for instance, you may come up with the concept that I should never ever tell a lie under all circumstances, even if even if it goes against the Vedic Dharma Shastras. I don't care, but I'll never tell a lie. Then that is non-scriptural act-based morality, which is rejected. That is not dharma. It is this which is dharma. Dharma, when the scripture is Vedic Shastra, activities which are prescribed are called dharma. So the entire battlefield, battle of Kurukshetra was fought just on this one point. Just on this one point. The Pandavas needed, they were Kshatriyas. According to Vedic Shastra, they can only the same governance. So Krishna kept on pressing this point, told the Dhritarashtra, represented by your mothers, we are by villages. This is what should be done. Give them at least 5 villages. And then Duryodhana made a famous remark, I would give them land which is smaller than the eye of an needle. Let me say it like that. Something to this effect he said. Then a war had to be set up. So many people died. So many people died. All the entire Kaurava, 100 sons of Dhritarashtra died. Just for this one principle. What is this principle? These are Kshatriyas. This is the only occupation they can accept according to the Dharma Shastras. So they should be given something to govern. That's all. That's all. It is just for this scriptural act-based morality that all of this had happened. But Yudhishthira is such a pious person. He did not even think along these lines. Of course, Krishna had put him into this kind of delusion because then Bhishma would explain. Bhishma's explanation is a very huge section in Mahabharata. Mahabharata has 18 cantos. In fact, the main storyline of the Pandavas and Kauravas that we popularly know is less than 40% of the actual Mahabharata. 60% of the actual Mahabharata has so many other important instructions, philosophical instructions, moral instructions, in great detail. Vyasadeva intentionally mixed all of this and presented it. So Krishna wanted Yudhishthira to hear from Bhishma. And Bhishma speaks about Raja Dharma, Apad Dharma, and Moksha Dharma. He speaks about the duties of a king. He speaks about the duties during crisis. There is always a consideration of crisis. Crises are all well defined also. What to do inside crisis, what to do outside crisis. And some about 200 chapters on the duties that take you away from the cycle of birth and death, moksha dharma. So Krishna wanted Bhishma to speak all these things, and Krishna wanted Yudhishthira to hear all these things. Therefore, he created this confusion in Yudhishthira's mind. Bhishma Dev was endowed with the power of leaving his material body at will, and his lying down on the bed of arrows was his own choice. This passing away of the great warrior attracted the attention of all the contemporary elites, and all of them assembled there to show their feelings of love, respect, and affection for the great soul. Tada te bhratara sarve sad ashvai swarnabhushitai anvagachan rathair vipra vyasadhaumyadayas tatha. At that time, all his brothers followed him on beautiful chariots drawn by first-class horses decorated with gold ornaments. With them were Vyasa and rishis like Dhaumya, the learned priest of the Pandavas, and others. Bhagwan api prashe rathena sad dhananjaya satair vyarrochatam nripa kuvera iva guhyakai, was sage amongst the Brahmanas. Lord Shri Krishna, the personality of God, had also followed, seated on a chariot with Arjuna. Thus King Yudhishthira appeared very aristocratic, like Kuvera, surrounded by his companions, the Guhyakas. Lord Shri Krishna wanted the Pandavas to be present before Bhishma Dev in the most aristocratic order, so that he might be pleased to see them happy at the time of his death. Kuvera is the richest of all the demigods, and herein King Yudhishthira appeared like him, Kuvera, for the procession along with Sri Krishna was quite appropriate to the royalty of King Yudhishthira. Drishtva nipatitam bhumau divaschutam iva maram pranemu pandava bhishmam sanuga sahachakrinam. Seeing him, Bhishma, lying on the ground like a demigod fallen from the sky, the Pandava king Yudhishthira, along with his younger brothers and Lord Krishna, bow down before him. Lord Krishna was also a younger cousin of Maharaj Yudhishthira, as well as the intimate friend of Arjuna. But all the family members of the Pandavas knew Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of God. The Lord, although conscious of his supreme position, always behaved in humanly custom. And so he also bowed down before the dying Bhishma Dev, as if he were one of the younger brothers of King Yudhishthira. Tatra Brahmarshiyas sarve, Devarshiyascha saptama, Rajarshiyascha tatra asan, drashtum bharatapumgavam, just to see the chief of the descendants of King Bharata, Bhishma, all the great souls in the universe, namely the Rishi amongst the demigods, Brahmanas and kings, all situated in the quality of goodness, were assembled there. So at that very moment, all of them arrived. They all came to see the chief of the descendants of King Bharata, Bhishma. The Rishis are those who have attained perfection by spiritual achievements. Such spiritual achievements can be earned by all, whether one is a king or a mendicant. Bhishma Dev himself was also one of the Brahmarshis and the chief of the descendants. All Rishis are situated in the quality of goodness. All of them assembled there and hearing the news of the great quality of spirit. Notice that these sages, they don't discriminate. So therefore they come. Parvato Narado Dhaumyo Bhagavan Badarayanaha Brihadashvo Bharadvaj Sashishyo Renakasutah Vasitha Indra Pramadas Trito Gritsam Madositah Pivan Gautamo Trishya Kaushiko Sudarshanaha. All the sages like Parvata Muni, Narada, Dhaumya, Vyasa, the incarnation of God, Brihadashva, Bharadwaja, and Parashurama and disciples, Vasitha, Indra Pramada, Trita, Gritsamada, Asita, Kshivan, Gautama, Atri, Kaushika, and Sudarshana were present. Then Prabhupada gives a brief life sketch of these sages. Very, very useful for us. Parvata Muni. He's almost always a constant companion of Narada Muni. They are also spacemen, competent to travel in the air without the help of any material vehicle. Parvata Muni is also a Devarshi, or a great sage amongst the demigods like Narada. He was present along with Narada at the sacrificial ceremony of Maharaj Janamejaya, son of Maharaj Parikshit. And this was the famous Sarpayaga. In the sacrifice, all the snakes of the world were to be killed. Parvata Muni and Narada Muni were called Gandharvas also, because they can travel in the air, singing the glories of the Lord. Since they can travel in the air, they observed Draupadi's Swayamvara ceremony from the air. Like Narada Muni, Parvata Muni also used to visit the royal assembly in the heaven of King Indra. As a Gandharva, sometimes he visited the royal assembly of Kuvera, one of the important demigods. Both Narada and Parvata were once in trouble with the daughter of Maharaj Srinjaya. Maharaj Srinjaya got the benediction of a son by Parvata Muni. These details come in the various Puranas. Narada Muni is inevitably associated with the narrations of the Puranas. It's described in the Bhagavatam. We already saw that. In Mahabharata, his name comes in many places. He initiated Prahlad Maharaj, Dhruva Maharaj, and many celebrated devotees of the Lord. He initiated even Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedic literature. So from Vyasadeva, Madhvacharya was initiated. And thus the Madhva Sampradaya, in which the Gaudiya Sampradaya is also included, has spread all over the universe. Narada Muni has also instructed many kings. He instructed Prahlad Maharaj. He instructed Vasudeva. He instructed Yudhishthira. He instructs Vasudeva in 11th canto. He instructed Prahlad Maharaj 7th canto. He instructed Yudhishthira 7th canto. Dhaumya, well known from Mahabharata. Sage who practiced severe penances at Utkochaka Tirtha and was appointed royal priest of the Pandava kings. He acted as a priest in many religious functions of the Pandavas. Means he conducted their samskaras. And also each of the Pandavas was attended by him at the betrothal of Draupadi. He was present even during the exile of the Pandavas and used to advise them in circumstances when they were perplexed. He instructed them how to live incognito for 1 year, and his instructions were strictly followed by the Pandavas during that time. He gave very elaborate religious instructions to Maharaj Yudhishthira. He was actually the right type of priest of a householder, for he could guide the Pandavas on the right path of religion. A priest is meant for guiding the householder progressively on the right path of ashrama dharma, or the occupational duty of a particular caste. There's practically no difference between the family priest and the spiritual master. The sages, saints, and brahmanas were especially meant for such functions. Then we come to Vyasadeva. He's known as Krishna Dvaipayana, Satyavati Sutta, Parasharya, Parasharatmaja, Badarayana, Vedavyasa, etc. He's dark blue, so he's called Krishna. Born in an island, and he's dark blue, so he's called Krishna Dvaipayana. She's born in an island, so he's called Dvaipayana. The son of Satyavati, so he's called Satyavati Sutta. Son of Parashara, so he's called Parasharya or Parasharatmaja. His cottage at Badrinath, Badarayana. He compiled the Vedas, Vedavyasa. He was the son of Mahamuni Parashara in the womb of Satyavati, prior to her betrothal with Maharaj Shantanu, the father of the great general grandfather Bhishma Dev. He's a powerful incarnation of Narayana, and he broadcast the Vedic wisdom to the world. Vyasa is a post, and that post is a post of empowerment. As such, Vyasadeva is offered respects before one chants the Vedic literature, especially the Puranas. Shukadeva Goswami was his son, and rishis like Vaishambhayana were his disciples for different branches of the Vedas. He's the author of the Mahabharata and Srimad Bhagavatam. He's also the compiler of the Vedanta Sutra, Brahma Sutra. Amongst sages, he is the most respected author by dint of severe penances. When he wanted to record the great epic Mahabharata for the welfare of all people in the age of Kali, he was feeling the necessity of a powerful writer who could take up his dictation. By the order of Brahmaji, Sri Ganeshji took up the charge of noting down the dictation on the condition that Vyasadeva would not stop dictation for a moment. The Mahabharata was thus compiled by the joint endeavor of Vyasa and Ganesha. By the order of his mother Satyavati, who was later married to Maharaj Shantanu, and by the request of Bhishma Dev, the eldest son of Maharaj Shantanu, by his first wife, the Ganges, he begot 3 brilliant sons. These were Rashtrapanda and Vidura. This arrangement, Niyoga, was allowed prior to Kali Yuga. It's forbidden in Kali Yuga. So Mahabharata was compiled by Vyasadeva after the battle of Kurukshetra, and after the death of all the heroes of Mahabharata. It was first spoken in the royal assembly of Maharaj Janamejaya. Brihadashva was an ancient sage. He used to meet Maharaj Yudhishthira now and then. Met Yudhishthira at Kamyavan. He spoke the famous history of Nala Damayanti. There was another Brihadashva, but that was a king. Bharadwaj, one of the 7 great rishis, was present when Arjuna was born. He performed severe penances. He met Kritachi, and Drona was then born. So Drona is considered Bharadwaj's son. Some others say that Bharadwaja is different from the Maharshi Bharadwaja, one of the 7 great rishis. Parashuram. We will come across Parashuram's pastimes in summary in Srimad Bhagavatam. Born to Jamadagni Rishi and Renuka Devi. He is the Shakti incarnation. He destroyed the Kshatriya community that had gone corrupt. He did it 21 times. Then he performed austerities, performed penances at Mahendra Parvat. Mahendra Parvat is Karnataka Kerala border. After taking the whole earth from the Kshatriyas, he gave it in charity to Kashyapa Muni. Parshuram instructed Dhanurved to Dronacharya because he happened to be a Brahman. Parshuram is so old that he met both Rama and Krishna at different times. He fought with Rama, but he accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of God. He also praised Arjuna when he sang with Krishna. When Bhishma refused to marry Amba, who wanted him to become her husband, Amba met Parshuram, and by her request only, he asked Bhishma Dev to accept her as his wife. Bhishma refused to obey his order, although he was one of the spiritual masters of Bhishma Dev, because Bhishma had learned something from Parshuram. But because he refused to obey his order, there was a fight. Parshuram fought with Bhishma Dev, when Bhishma neglected his warning. Both of them fought very severely. At last, Parshuram was pleased with Bhishma and gave him the benediction of becoming the greatest fighter in the world. Vasishtha, Brahma's own son, appears in Ramayana, appears in Mahabharata, appears in Bhagavatam also. Just a little bit. He celebrated the coronation ceremony of the personality of God at Sri Ram. He was present also on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. There was a great tension between him and Vishwamitra. This history appears in Ramayana, first canto, Balakanda. Who wanted his Kamadhenu, wish-fulfilling cow. Vasishtha Muni refused to spare his Kamadhenu, and for this Vishwamitra killed his 100 sons. As a perfect Brahmana, he tolerated all the taunts of Vishwamitra. Once he tried to commit suicide on account of Vishwamitra's torture, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. He jumped from a hill, but the stones on which he fell became a stack of cotton, and thus he was saved. He jumped into the ocean, but the waves washed him ashore. He jumped into the river, but the river also washed him ashore. Thus all his suicide attempts were unsuccessful. He is also one of the 7 rishis, Saptarishis, husband of Arundhati, the famous star. Arundhati is the presiding goddess of one of the stars. Star also is named Arundhati. Indra Pramada is a famous sage. Trita, Ekat, and Dvita. They are 3 brothers. Once Trita Muni fell into a well, he was an organizing worker of many sacrifices. And as one of the great sages, he also came to show respect to Bhishma Ji at death. One of the 7 sages in Varunaloka, he hailed from the western countries of the world. As such, most probably belonged to the European countries. At that time, the whole world was under one Vedic culture. Gritsa Mother, another sage, Devarshi, looks like, used to visit the royal assembly of Yudhishthir, also visited the place where Bhishma breathed his last. Sometimes he explained the glories of Lord Shiva before Maharaj Yudhishthir. He was the son of Vitahavya and he resembled in features the body of Indra. Sometimes enemies of Indra mistook him to be Indra and arrested him. He lived a life of celibacy and was powerful in every respect. Asita. This Asita is Asita Devala Rishi. He's one of the members in Janamejaya's snake sacrifice. He also participated in the coronation of Yudhishthira. Kakshivan, son of Gautama Muni. Atri. Atri is Brahma's son. And his wife is Anasuya. Out of 7 Manasaputras, that means Brahma from his thought, he created some sons. They are his mental sons. Out of the 7 great Brahmana sages, Atri is one. He had 2 Kshatriya sons who became kings. Prachetas were also from his dynasty. Kaushika. Number of sages by this name. Sudarshana, Sudarshan Chakra. In some of the Vedic literatures, it is said that Agnidev, the fire god, presented this weapon to Lord Sri Krishna. But factually, this weapon is eternally carried by the Lord. Agnidev present this weapon to Krishna in the same way that Rukmini was given by Maharaj Rukma to the Lord. The Lord accepts such presentations from his devotees, even though such presentations are eternally his property. So Sudarshan has been used by the Lord very often. Followers of Nimbarka Acharya say that Nimbarka is an incarnation of Sudarshan. This Sudarshan who went to see Bhishma Dev. Manye cha muneyo brahman brahmarata mala shishye rupeta ajatmur kashyapan girasadayah. And many others like Shukadev Goswami and other purified souls, Kashyapa and Angirasa and others, all accompanied by their respective disciples, arrived there. Brahmarata, Shukadev, the teacher of the first teacher of Srimad Bhagavatam. He had also studied Mahabharata before that. He recited Srimad Bhagavatam for the first time in the presence of Maharaj Parikshit. He thoroughly studied all the Vedic literatures from his great father. Thus, he was a completely purified soul by dint of his extensive knowledge in the principles of religion. He was also present in the royal assembly of Maharaj Yudhishthir and at the fasting of Maharaj Parikshit. As a bona fide disciple of Sri Vyasadeva, he inquired from his father very extensively about religious principles and spiritual values. And his great father also satisfied him by teaching him the yoga system by which one can attain the spiritual kingdom, the difference between fruitive work and empiric knowledge, the ways and means of attaining spiritual realization, the four ashramas, the sublime position of the Supreme Personality of God, the process of seeing him face to face. So many topics he has taught him. The bona fide candidate for receiving knowledge, the consideration of the five elements, the unique position of intelligence, the consciousness of the material nature and the living entity, the symptoms of the self-realized soul, the working principles of the material body, the symptoms of the influential modes of nature, the tree of perpetual desire, and psychic activities. He sometimes called Araneya, Arunisutta, Vyasaki, Vyasatmaja. These all indicate that he was son
Yes, we can hear you.
Hare Krishna, can anyone hear me? Something went wrong from my end. Okay, sorry. No idea what happened. Something went wrong. Anyway, I just resumed from wherever I stopped, from wherever I thought I stopped. Okay, so Kashyapa is one of the Prajapatis. We'll come across in the sixth canto. We'll come across a particular way how human beings were born. So anyway, he married 13 daughters of Daksha. And he was a Prajapati. He was meant to populate this universe. So Kashyapa was present at the time of Arjuna's birth. Angirasa is another name of Brihaspati. Brihaspati is the guru of the Devas. Drona was empowered by him. He is the counterpart of Shukracharya. So Shukracharya is the guru of the demons. Okay, then he begot 6 sons like the fire god by his wife Chandramasi. He could travel in space. Therefore, he could present himself even in the planets of Brahmaloka and Indraloka. Once he cursed Indra, who thus had to become a hog on the earth and was unwilling to return to heaven. Okay, then let's continue. Tan sametan mahabhagan upalabhya vasuttamaha pujayamasa dharmagyo deshakala vibhagavit. Bhishma Dev, who was the best amongst the 8 Vasus, received and welcomed all the great and powerful rishis who were assembled there, for he knew perfectly all the religious principles according to time and place. Deshakala vibhagavit. He knew the rules for place, time, and so on. Because he could not get up. Shayana eva manasa vacha cha pujayamasa. So he honored everyone who had come with his mind and with speech. This is Sutta Goswami's intention behind using this word Deshakala Vibhagavit. Expert religionists know perfectly well how to adjust religious principles in terms of time and place. All the great acharyas or religious preachers or reformers of the world executed their mission by adjustment of religious principles in terms of time and place. There are different climates and situations in different parts of the world. And if one has to discharge his duties to preach the message of the Lord, he must be expert in adjusting things in terms of the time and place. Bhishma Dev was one of the 12 great authorities in preaching this cult of devotional service, and therefore he could receive and welcome all the powerful sages assembled there. At his deathbed, from all parts of the universe, he was certainly unable at that time to welcome and receive them physically, because he was neither at his home nor in a normal, healthy condition. But he was quite fit by the activities of his sound mind. Therefore, he could utter sweet words with hearty expressions, and all of them were well received. One can perform one's duty by physical work, by mind, and by words. And he knew well how to utilize them in the proper place, and therefore there was no difficulty for him to receive them, although physically unfit. Krishnam Chatat Prabhavagya Asinam Jagadishwaram Hridistam Pujayamasa Mayopata Vigraham. Lord Shri Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, yet he manifests his transcendental form by his internal potency. This very Lord was sitting before Bhishma Dev, and since Bhishma Dev knew of his glories, he worshipped him duly. Hridistham Santam Puratascha Asinam Pujayamasa. So the Supreme Lord was in his heart, and he was seated before him. So therefore he honored him. So this is the Lord's omnipotency. By his internal potency, he was able to manifest himself outside also. Andantarastha Paramanuchayantarastham. When he manifests his eternal transcendental form in the material world, he does so by his internal potency. The external potency or the material energy has nothing to do with his eternal form. All these truths were known to Sri Bhishma Dev, who worshipped him accordingly. Tad Prabhavagya. Bhishma knew the glory of Lord Krishna. Panduputranupasīnān prashraya prema sangata abhyachashtanuragashrai andhibhutena chakshusha. The sons of Maharaj Pandu were sitting silently nearby, overtaken with affection for their dying grandfather. Seeing this, Bhishma Dev congratulated them with feeling. There were tears of ecstasy in his eyes, for he was overwhelmed by love and affection. He was blinded by the tears of ecstasy, meaning that he was overwhelmed. He was overwhelmed to see them. When Maharaj Pandu died, his sons were all small children, and naturally they were brought up under the affection of elderly members of the royal family, specifically by Bhishma Dev. Later on, when the Pandavas were grown up, they were cheated by cunning Duryodhana and company. And Bhishma Dev, although he knew that the Pandavas were innocent and were unnecessarily put into trouble, could not take the side of the Pandavas for political reasons. At the last stage of his life, when Bhishma Dev saw his most exalted grandsons, headed by Maharaj Yudhishthira, sitting very gently at his side, the great warrior grandfather could not check his loving tears, which were automatically flowing from his eyes. He remembered the great tribulations suffered by his most pious grandsons. Certainly, he was the most satisfied man because of Yudhishthira's being enthroned in place of Duryodhana, and thus he began to congratulate them. Aho kashtam ahonyayam yadyuyam dharmanandana jivitum narhatha klishtam viprad dharmachyutashraya. Bhishma Dev said, "Oh, what terrible sufferings and what terrible injustices you good souls suffer for being the sons of religion personified. You did not deserve to remain alive under those tribulations, yet you were protected by the Brahmanas, God, and religion." So in 11 verses, Yudhishthira spoke, beginning with text 12. Aho kashtam, alas, how difficult, how abominable it is, how unrighteous it is that you, all of you, who had taken shelter of Vipras or Brahmanas, Dharma, Vedic Dharma, and Lord Achyuta, Lord Krishna, you had to undergo such tribulations. Maharaj Yudhishthira was disturbed due to the great massacre in the Battle of Kurukshetra. Bhishma Dev could understand this. How he could understand? Because he knew how Yudhishthira thinks. And therefore he spoke first of the terrible sufferings of Maharaj Yudhishthira. He was put into difficulty by injustice only. And the Battle of Kurukshetra was fought just to counteract this injustice. Therefore, he should not regret the great massacre. He wanted to point out particularly that they were always protected by the Brahmanas, the Lord, and religious principles. As long as they were protected by these three important items, there was no cause of disappointment. Thus, Bhishma Dev encouraged Maharaj Yudhishthira to dissipate his despondency. As long as a person is fully in cooperation with the wishes of the Lord, guided by the bona fide Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, and strictly following religious principles, one has no cause for despondency, however trying the circumstances of life. Samstate tirathe pandau pritha bal prajavadhu yushmat krite bahun kleshan prapta tokavati. As far as my daughter-in-law Kunti is concerned, upon the great general Pandu's death, she became a widow with many children, and therefore she suffered greatly. And when you were grown up, she suffered a great deal also because of your actions. So the idea is not only you suffered, an innocent lady, Kunti Devi, she also suffered. So this battle of Kurukshetra was justified to neutralize all this, to ensure that these things don't happen to others. The sufferings of Kunti Devi are doubly lamented. She suffered greatly because of early widowhood and to get her minor children brought up in the royal family. And when her children were grown up, she continued to suffer because of her son's actions. So her sufferings continued. This means that she was destined to suffer by providence, and this one has to tolerate without being disturbed. This point will become clear in the very next verse. Sarvam kala kritam manye bhavatam cha yadapriyam sapalo yadvashe loko vayoriva ghanavalihi. In my opinion, this is all due to inevitable time, under whose control everyone in every planet is carried just as the clouds are carried by the wind. Kala kritatvena shokam varayati sarvamiti dvabhyam. In two verses, text 14 and 15, he now dissipates Yudhishthir's lamentation, stating that all of this has happened by the force of time. Bhavatamapi. This is a situation for all of you also. Yadvashe, yasya vashavarti. Under the control of time, all of you had to undergo this suffering. There is control by time all over the space within the universe, as there is control by time all over the planets. All the big gigantic planets, including the sun, are being controlled by the force of air, as the clouds are carried by the force of air. Similarly, the inevitable kala or time controls even the action of the air and other elements. Everything, therefore, is controlled by the supreme kala, a forceful representative of the Lord within the material world. Thus, Yudhishthira should not be sorry for the inconceivable action of time. Everyone has to bear the actions and reactions of time as long as one is within the conditions of the material world. Yudhishthira should not think that he had committed sins in his previous birth and is suffering the consequence. Even the most pious has to suffer the condition of material nature. But a pious man is faithful to the Lord, for he is guided by the bona fide Brahmana and Vaishnava, following the religious principles. See, that is this point. Prabhupada is bringing us Vipra Dharma Chitashraya. When you're protected by God, by listening to Brahmanas who follow the injunctions of piety. So there are always three considerations: Vipra, Dharma, Achyuta. Achyuta is the Supreme Personality of God. Dharma is Vedic Dharma, injunctions of the Vedic scriptures. And Vipras are the Brahmanas, also Brahmanas by Guna Karma. So as long as we are guided by Vipras who act and who instruct according to Dharma. See, how to instruct is also already stated in the scripture. And when one is protected by Lord Achyuta, then he is in a safe position. These three guiding principles should be the aim of life. One should not be disturbed by the tricks of eternal time. Even the great controller of the universe, Brahmaji, is also under the control of that time. Therefore, one should not grudge being thus controlled by time, despite being a true follower of religious principles. Okay, questions? Let me look at chat. Okay, anyone has any questions? Otherwise, we'll stop. All right, so stop it. If you have any questions, you can ask me. I can deal with it in the Telegram group or like that. Panchakalpatarubhyasya kripasamnibhyo cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Okay.